Greetings gamers, my name is Anto and today we're talking about an element of world building that has resulted in some of the biggest surprises and unexpected things in my homebrew world, and that is ley lines. This video is sponsored by Tales of Fablecraft, more on that later. So what are ley lines? Ley lines are a magical construct that connect one or more points of intense magical power together, and they kind of chart across your world, and anyone that is attuned to magic or knows the signs can use ley lines to follow along them and find their point of origin, which is usually some powerful source of magic. They appear in a bunch of different media and they have slightly different interpretations depending on what the media you're consuming is. Like some of them, it's just a ley line is the straight line you can draw between all of the great kind of points of interest in your world. Some of them, it is a ley line only exists between two magical points. Others, the ley lines radiate out in like a spiral. So there's a couple different ways that you can do it, and I'll show you how I use a combination of a couple of those elements later on in the video. Let's start with, I want to talk about why use ley lines in your world building. What is the purpose? What is the benefit? For me, the biggest reason to use ley lines is it hints at an underlying inherently magical world. So if you don't want to, you don't have to interact with ley lines as a player. You don't have to put ley lines in front of your players. Your players might never even know ley lines exist, and you can still get quite a lot of benefit from them as a game master, and I'm going to talk about that later on in the video as well. But one of the things that I really love about ley lines is they hint towards this ancient magical civilization and the things that have come before in your world. So you might have ley line point of origins for ancient magical cities that are long forgotten to time. But for those that know what they're doing, they could follow these ley lines back to their point of origin, find these lost, forgotten relics of an ancient world, and have a whole kind of national treasure discovery montage movie kind of situation. And I think that makes them a lot of fun. Another thing that I really like about ley lines when it comes to world building is it takes some of the decision making just completely off my hands. So we're going to talk about this a little more later in the video, but where two ley lines cross, you have a perfect recipe for drama and a potential point of interest to place down into your world that you don't need to do any thinking about. Once you've placed a few points of origin in your world, the ley lines as they intersect give you all sorts of stories that you might not have otherwise considered. And the third reason why you might want to use ley lines is they can open up some possibilities for brand new gameplay. Depending on what system you're playing, some systems already have alternate rules for ley lines, like Pathfinder 2nd Edition in the Secrets of Magic book already has a whole section dedicated to ley line magic. But if you're playing something like 5th Edition or OSR games, any other fantasy system, you can introduce some new mechanics tied to ley lines to allow your players to kind of power up a little bit when they find these ley lines and discover their source of origin. If they come across a conjuration ley line, for example, they might get a buff to their conjuration magic, they might get advantage on their spells or their saves against conjuration, or just some small but meaningful benefit to attuning to this node of power in the world. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to leave a like down below, and if you want more world building videos like this, hit the subscribe button to get even more content. So next, let's talk about how I place ley lines in my world. And I've got a couple of different ways to approach this. And I approach it kind of almost chronologically, thinking about which ley lines and which magical events and phenomena would have happened first and caused ley lines to develop. And I go through kind of the prehistory of my world like that, applying ley lines to them. So to show this off, I've loaded up a copy of my world up in Affinity Designer, which is what I use to place all my ley lines, but just anything where you can put lines on top of an image will do for this. And I've organized all of mine chronologically. So I'm just going to go through a couple of them and show you how I would place them. So in my world of Ishtar, the very first set of ley lines that we have in this world are divine ley lines that come from when the dragon god Ishtar fell to earth after their death, created this massive crater which later became Ishtar's Tears, and the ley lines radiate out from that point in a divine magic because this is a primordial god. So we open that up and you can see that we have a variety of ley lines emanating from the point of Ishtar's fall throughout the world. While we're talking about this, I'd really love to know if you use ley lines already in your world, so let me know down in the comments below. I especially want to know if you do things differently to me, because I'm always looking for new sources of inspiration for how to do things for my own homebrew world. So another form of our ley lines after our divine lines is going to be cataclysm. So anytime there is a large magical event that causes a kind of sizable systemic change in the world, we're going to get ley lines that are produced as a result of that. My world has got a number of these, but the next one that happened kind of after Ishtar's fall was the Akmiri cataclysm, which happened down here in the ruins of Akmiri. And so we place that smoke with the ley lines emanating outwards, and immediately you can see that they start crossing those divine lines that are caused by Ishtar's fall. And with the Akmiri cataclysm lines, I assigned those the conjuration tag because the circumstances around that cataclysm were kind of a conjuration magic in nature. So I want the magic of those ley lines to be kind of conjuration coded. And the reason is when they cross over another line, I can use those two different elements, in this case, conjuration and divine, to start putting in points of interest. So as an example, over here on the continent of Valen, you can see that we've got a divine and a conjuration ley line crossing over. Where they cross, you're going to have a powerhouse of divine conjuration magic. I would interpret this as that meaning that this is a place where the veil between the material world and the divine world in my setting, so one of the divine extraplanar planes of existence, is thin, and divine creatures are able to come into the material plane through that point. So if my players were adventuring in this part of Valen, I'd have a little point of interest there, denoting that celestial beings are kind of conjured into the world through this weak fabric of reality caused by the crossing over of two ley lines. And that's really what I mean when I say that this approach takes a lot of thinking off your head, because I didn't have to really do much of anything to come up with that story and that point of interest and that plot hook other than look at where two lines on a map cross. Now, obviously, I've got a lot of different ley lines going on in my world. If we open some up, we've got some profane ones in the Hellgate Maelstrom, for example. We've got more conjuration ones coming from Direfal, which is the great volcano of the world where the dwarves were said to have been brought into being. And as they start crisscrossing, things get visually quite complex, but it's relatively easy to just zoom in and look at the ways they cross. But all of these points have different numbers of lines coming out from them. I want to talk about how I come up with the number of spokes to come off each of these kind of power centers, the origins of these ley lines. So the way that I do this is predominantly using tarot. So each of the ley lines I will associate with one of the major arcana from the tarot deck. Now, this will either be through thematic things, so looking at what a tarot card's meaning or some of its kind of more subtle elements are and relating that to a point of origin for a ley line. Or in the case of Ishtar's fall, Ishtar is the star. I will just take the star tarot card and use that major arcana's number to determine the number of spokes that come off one of these kind of power centers, these origins of the ley line. So in the case of Ishtar's fall, our kind of divine ley lines, the star's number in tarot is 17, so we get 17 spokes emanating out of this. And then another thing that I will do is if I have ley lines where there are multiple points of origin, so for example, the Chaos Phage ley lines in my world, there are 2 points of origin from that. Its original point of origin over in Talavar, and then kind of its secondary over in Valen. I will rotate them so that at least one spoke from each points to the point of origin, so we get that connecting line. So if someone is trying to investigate the Chaos Phage, as an example, they could use one of their ley lines. Let's say they start out in Talavar, they could use one of the ley lines to find one of the points of origin and then follow through that to find the second one, and that way you get this really connected web of points of origin, and you could have a whole campaign connected to these different points of magical origin, and the players could navigate them via ley lines, and it could take them on all kinds of zany travels. Now, before we talk about how ley lines have completely changed and shaped my homebrew world, I want to talk about today's sponsor. I'm always on the lookout for new tools, new VTT options, and new games to try out, which is why I'm really pleased that today's video is sponsored by Tales of Fablecraft, because it's all of those things in one. Tales of Fablecraft is a new TTRPG that's built specifically for virtual tabletop play. It's a simple, easy to learn D6 based fantasy system set in the world of Mithras. It's currently available to pick up for free on Steam, is available on Windows, macOS, and iPad, and is getting full mobile support planned for next year. The core system itself is really easy to pick up and learn, making it great for introducing brand new folks or kids to TTRPGs, especially if you're trying to convince some of your video game playing friends to try TTRPGs with you. The custom VTT engine that Tales of Fablecraft is built on is visually really impressive. It's not overloaded with features or options, but the UI is really intuitive, and if you've ever played a CRPG, you'll get to grips with how to navigate the interface almost immediately. There's also built-in text, voice, and video chat, so you can host your entire session within Tales of Fablecraft, and they have a growing slate of homebrew tools to help you craft your own adventures in the world of Mithras. Tales of Fablecraft comes with a bunch of pre-made adventures that are ready to go, and this is actually my favorite part about it. Not only are they laid out to be easily run with basically zero prep work from the GM, which is exactly my jam, they come with animated art backgrounds for setting the scene, beautiful battle maps for all of your combats, custom soundtracks for each location, and some of them even include voiced NPC dialogue if you're a nervous first-time GM or want to run through these adventures solo. When I first started exploring Tales of Fablecraft, I found myself losing track of time and running through a big chunk of the Star Adventure solo just because the game does such a good job of creating an immersive environment for the players. If you're looking for a purpose-built VTT experience with gorgeous visuals and sound and want to lose yourself for a few hours in a bright, hope-filled fantasy world, check out Tales of Fablecraft using the link below, and thanks again to Riftweaver for supporting the channel. So to finish off today, I want to talk about how ley lines have specifically impacted my game world, and to do that we're going to jump back over into the map of all my ley lines, and we're going to turn everything on so you can see the scope of them all. And immediately it's a visual nightmare. There's so many of them, and that's because I have really leaned into ley lines as a core underlying element of world building that the players will probably never see a lot of this, but it helps me make informed decisions about where things are, how they interact, and all the good stuff that we've already talked about. So one of the very first things that I did with ley lines in my world is concerned with the primordial god Terras the Devourer. Terras is one of the old gods, and while most of them were wiped out, Terras was just too powerful to be contended with, so the new gods imprisoned Terras in the pit, this extra dimensional prison, which actually exists within the material world. Terras is essentially cocooned inside the earth, and there are 12 seals which keep Terras imprisoned. This is a plotline that's come up a few times throughout the course of my campaigns, where the players have visited locations that have got a Terras seal in them, and then other things have been built on top of them, and they've had to interact with those elements and gotten a little bit of lore about the real truth behind Terras. So if we go ahead and turn off all of the lines here, except for my ruinous lines, the Terras seals, you can see that where a lot of the other points of origin for these ley lines emanate outwards, instead the Terras seals are a web, a self-contained web. Each point links to the 11 other points, and they create this closed loop. And what this has done is it's given me a bunch of ideas that I wouldn't have otherwise had. So the first thing is I know where Terras will emerge if those seals are ever broken now. So given that these 12 seals link together, it makes sense that Terras would have to emerge within that web. And when I look at it visually, the most logical place to me would be slap bang in the middle of the Gleaming Sea. This space in the center of the web where if these seals were ever broken, like a great kaiju, Terras the Devourer would rise up from the ocean and then start wreaking havoc on the world. But more than that, and I talked about this in a channel members video recently, and it's actually the thing that inspired me to make this entire video. So if you want to get more in-depth noodly world building content, check out channel memberships down below. I was looking at some planning stuff regarding the Terras seals, and I noticed something that I'd never picked up on before. So the Terras seals, there are 2 of them on main continent Talavar. One of them is up in Silea, the last free empire, and the other was down in the Dusk Empire, really, really close to the Black Tower. Now, originally, I thought this was going to be in the mountains, maybe 100 miles away from the Black Tower. But when I was looking at it, given the context I now have thanks to developing out Talavar as a nation, knowing things about the subjugation, this period of history just before when my current campaign takes place, I was struck by inspiration. So the Dusk Empire, which was up until very recently in my campaign ruled by the Subjugator, a powerful spellcaster who believed that a great evil was coming to destroy the earth, and only through a united Talavar could it be stopped, swept across the continent, dominating everything before him. up until this point, I had no idea what his actual goal was or what he was trying to stop. But when I realized how close that terrace seal, which the point of interest for it was placed long before I started developing the Jewel Cities, when I realized how close that was to his Black Tower, and when I realized that the second point in Talabar was up in Silea, which is really close to where the final battle of his subjugation took place, it all fell into place. And I realized that what the subjugator was doing was trying to stop anyone from ever being able to open the terrace seals and unleash the Devourer. So I shifted the terrace seal down here just a little bit, moved it under the Black Tower, and had it so that the subjugator had built the Black Tower and the city around to defend this terrace seal. And the reason that the subjugation had happened, the reason that the subjugator wanted to bring together all of Talavar and was conquering it, was to get to this other terrace seal to secure that as well. And all of that kind of world building fell into place really naturally because of this work that I'd previously done involving ley lines, points of interest, and those kind of really non-player facing things that now give me so much rich context to add to my world if the players ever decide to interact with the subjugator storyline, with the Desk Empire, with the terrace seals. There's just layers and layers of detail that I have there to draw upon now that make the world feel deep and rich and like it's got this long-standing history. But then there's also another benefit to doing this. When I have all of my ley lines turned on, I was looking at all of this and I was thinking, this is all looking great, but there's a couple of areas that look a little sparse, and looking at those empty areas immediately triggered some inspiration for me. So up here in particular, up above Valen, there is a really blank spot. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to have a civilization or a peoples who can only be found by the traces of leyline magic that lead to them? So I put in an illusion-based leyline node that spreads out. You see it's ever so faint here on the map, because I use thickness and opacity to denote kind of the power of ley lines on this map for myself. But there is this hidden place out in the ocean that nobody knows about. I don't know what's there. It's something that is hidden and secret even for me, and it's just a nice little treat that if the players ever really got invested in ley lines and started kind of investigating them, they could come across one of these ley lines and be like, oh, this is a type of magic that we've not come across before, follow it, and eventually it would lead out into the ocean and they would discover this hidden place, and I would figure out what's in this hidden place. And that's one of the things that I love most about this style of world building, this layer upon layer style of world building, because even after many years developing the world of Ishtar, I still can have big surprises in the way that I build out the world, and there are still unknown things for me to find. And that's just such a joy as a world builder and as a game master, to know that as I'm running in this world, there's always just going to be hidden things for the players to uncover. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you use ley lines or if this has inspired you to consider using ley lines down in the comments below. If you want to keep watching, check out this video where I talk about how I made a region of my world called the Howling Badlands, this magically irradiated wasteland. But until next time, happy gaming.